Banjothon 2013. Here's Barry Palmer.
Well,
Barry, tell us a little bit how you got started playing, early musical influences, and then where are you today? Because you're only about half of your former self. So how'd you get started playing, and who were some of your early musical influences?
Well, I kind of look at it like this. I grew up in the rural part of Appalachia and down in the North Georgia mountains. We were kind of isolated from everything else. As a matter of fact, we got the Grand Ole Opry on Tuesday night. My influences are much like first generation player influences. My grandmother and my dad both played the banjo, and there were a lot of banjo players in our area. A fellow named Paul Elliott, who learned a lot from Fred Bacon and those guys, the cylinder record, Vass Osmond and people like that. They had cylinder records that they learned from. And those guys played, the two finger, and they played a lot of that stuff around where I'm from. There were no, as a matter of fact, I remember the first three-fingered Scruggs style player that I ever heard was a guy that was about 4 or 5 years, no, he was 10 years older than me, and he had the first Gibson Mastertone banjo I ever saw.
Now, what year would that have been?
About 1966.
Sure.
And I remember very well, they had a sail barn down on the river, and folks would go down there, and it was a form of entertainment, I'm sure. And the only other thing, they would play at the holiness churches around there. They played banjos, Primitive Baptist and the Methodist and all. They wouldn't allow banjo in the house. But my situation was that my grandmother played, and she played pretty good. It was kind of like. That's the way she played.
So you were taught by
myself. Grandmother.
But how did you pick up?
Well,
that frailing style.
Well, that whole thing came from her.
Yes.
She reared me. My mother taught school. My dad worked. He had his own construction crew, built houses and businesses, and buildings and stuff. And I spent my formative years at her house with her playing. And she played piano and read shaped notes. But for her pastime, she started playing about 1923. And she and my grandfather moved to Pittsburgh, and he worked in the steel mill for a little while, and he bought her a banjo so she could, have something to pass her time away while he worked. And then she became pregnant with my mother, and they moved back south in 1925. And there was I'm sure the New England Society of Banjo Players that played classical music on it, and I'm sure that's what she heard, and I'm sure that's what she was listening to. Parlor music was still in vogue at the time, but it was being replaced by orchestral and big band and stuff like that, and traveling minstrel and vaudeville shows.
Yes.
And you're talking about the 20s, before the Great Depression, and I'm sure that's what she heard and what influenced her. When I was a kid, she would sit and play and sing stuff to me, and I just thought that was neat stuff. Well, my dad played. He bought a banjo from a hobo for $1.50, and he got the banjo and learned a few tunes, and he played like.
But then the filler.
Yeah, there
was
was
little filler.
He didn't know how to do the fills and stuff.
Right.
But he would play played Cold Creek March. In my neck of the woods, if you knew 3 songs, you were a player. You were very, very good at what you did. And they would go from home to home on weekends and play the same 3 songs. They had a jug band honest, this is so weird. If you know who Ralph Rensler is,
Sure.
Ralph came south and did the Brothers in Clay thing and featured the Metters family of Cleveland, Georgia, from where I'm from.
Right.
And my dad played in a jug band, and 3 of the members of the jug band were the Metters boys.
No kidding.
Yeah, and that was kind of funny, but they only knew 4 songs.
Right.
You know, they and I don't know that they could play them all the way through.
Yes.
You know, Cold Creek March, Cripple Creek, Buffalo Gal, and I think there was something else that they played.
Now, as you got to high school age,
Yeah.
and then you went on.
Well, I was playing. We had a little country store just out in the
Right.
middle of nowhere, and you know, between customers there wasn't much to do. So when grandmother died, I got her banjo. It was an original 5-string Stella. I think Slingerland Company manufactured it.
Right.
And I've still got it. It was an old skinhead thing. I'd sit out there on the front porch in the liar's bench with her banjo and sit there and play. Now, you have to understand, everybody that came along and stopped to get gas, they wanted to hear me play a tune. Well, I played the best of what I could play. Well, one day this guy came by, his name was Gary Welburn, and he said, that's not how you do that. I said, well, how do you do it? And he said, we got to get you some picks, son. And I, you know, what's that? You know, and I said, oh my goodness, I don't know anything about picks. And he told me what to get and where to go get it. We came back. My banjo didn't even have a 5th pick on it. It had been lost and gone. And Daddy found an old one somewhere, got from somebody, and we put in it. Didn't match the rest of the keys, got that in it. And he showed me what he knew. And of course, Grandma was dead, and I tried to learn. And everybody that would come through by the old store would say, let me show you that something. Say, here, son, let me have that banjo. And I'd learn whatever they learned, you know, whatever they knew and then I knew.
Right.
And then everybody that would come by, you know, different ones would show me. And, you know, I would say, if I could just get to be as good as so-and-so down here, he plays decent. And different ones would come by and spend time with me. And I learned to use a roll. Gary Welburn, and J.D. Robinson, who had gone on the road professionally and played with the Old Time Medicine Show, Dr. Scott, his Old Time Medicine Show, and he was playing with Clyde Moody and several other retired Grand Ole Opry acts. And he came back and he showed me a world of stuff. And then there was another guy there named Lamar Hood, and Lamar played great, but he was real introverted, mountain reticence, didn't want to talk to you much. And he showed me a lot of stuff, and I got progressively better. Then I discovered Bluegrass Festival. And I
About what year?
1974.
Okay.
And
how old were you at the time?
14.
Okay.
And I remember going to my first Bluegrass Festival, and I saw the Bluegrass Alliance, and I saw the Bannister Twins. Nobody knows who they are, but they're from up in Indiana, 2 girls. I thought it was Osborne Brothers, but the Osborne Brothers were there at that show. I saw the Stoneman family. I saw Don Reno and Bill Harrell and the Tennessee Cut-Ups, and I saw Josh Graves and not Dallas Smith, but I can't remember his brother's name. Anyway, the boys from Shiloh, Carl Story, Pinnacle Boys, and somebody else was there. And I thought it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever been to. A lot of people, everybody having a good time. Didn't take my banjo. But January of that year, my dad bought me an RB250. It was newer 250s. And I told him, I said, Dad, I never will forget this, on the streets of Gainesville, Georgia. I set the case down, I looked at him, I said, Dad, I won't be the best banjo player, good banjo player. I said, I'll be the best there is. And I came, I guess, pretty close to that at one point. I won Winfield 3 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And won a lot of other contests and stuff. And I became a contest player. But I did have the good fortune of meeting and becoming friends with several folks in Hiawassee. And in 1977, they made me a member of the Georgia Mountain Fair staff band, which was a band designed to back up acts that came through, both professional and non-professional. And I literally got to play with everybody in the business at some point or another, and I didn't have to go on the road. You know, in 1978, I graduated from high school and I went to Nashville. and I tried out, beat the streets, and went to Opryland, played at Opryland, finished the summer out there, and then I ended up working, playing, and jamming with guys that were in town, and I got introduced to Jim and Jesse, and I ended up being a fill-in banjo player and a Virginia boy with them. I ended up playing bass some with Jimmy Martin. I ended up playing with Connie Smith and different ones around town. And big thrill, I got to replace Jack Hicks with Conway Twitty. And on the shows that we did with Conway and Loretta, I got to play banjo behind her. So I got to do a lot of stuff early, at an early age.
Right.
And, people like James McKinney and, gosh, I can't remember all those guys back then. But we played a lot together and jammed and stuff.
Well, musically, you had a broad perspective
Well,
at a pretty early age.
Well, when I was in high school, I played trombone. And I played in a high school band, and I got to go out west and play with Stan Kenton. And get some really good heavy duty jazz rhythm, arrhythmic things. Artistry and rhythm was his whole thing for about 15 years. So I got exposed to other forms of music, but I came back home and applied it to the banjo. And so one of the things that I'm really proud of is, based on what I hear and how much time I've got to figure it out, I could pretty much, I had some automaticity and walk on stage and play with almost anybody at any time.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now, last 15, 20 years, what's your work-life situation been, and how has banjo fit into that work and life situation?
Well, it went according to a plan, and thank God it's gone according to plan. When I went through college, I became a marine biologist and chemist. I had a double major, chemistry, biology, and I decided, I can't make a living doing this. And I can make a living playing music, but is that always going to be there? So I decided I'd go wild and get me a real education. And I used what I knew and went to pharmacy school and became a pharmacist.
So where'd you go to pharmacy school?
University of Georgia.
Okay.
Now, being the fact that I was already playing, quote, professionally weekends and weeknights, during school and stuff, I got to pharmacy school to okay for me to be gone at key times when I needed to play. And it seemed like every time that we had a finals weekend or something like that, I had to be gone for something big at the fair, or I went on the road with somebody to fill in. Right. And the pharmacy school was kind enough to allow me to go out into the world and play my music so I could come back and pay tuition and go on to school. And that's what I did.
Yeah, good.
Now, the idea was to go to school to become a pharmacist so that when either a crippled, old age, or whatever, I would have something that I could make a living at without having to rely on my fingers. Yeah. And so the situation ballooned into something really wonderful for me. So I ended up being a full-time musician and a part-time pharmacist.
Yeah.
And I still am.
Yeah.
I'm the only part-time guy I know that's working 7 days a week.
Right.
And when I need to go do something or go play, I just get off. I don't have to ask or beg for anything. So it's worked out rather well.
The pharmacy can allow that opportunity.
Yeah, it did.
One of the few high-paying professional positions where literally you can fill and go weekends and free yourself up.
Well, it's made it easy for me to continue to pursue this quest.
That's great. Now, tell us about banjo acquisitions and how you got into Gibson or flathead banjos, and then evolve us into the top tension flathead that you're sitting there holding.
Well, the whole thing was I had never seen, they were talking about good banjos. In our area, the old timers talked about bacon banjos, and they talked about Vega banjos. You had one of them good Vega banjos, you had as good as you can get.
That's it.
Until somebody told me, he said, that's all, forget that. And I said, why? I said, I'd like to have a Vega. And he said, yeah, but let me tell you something. If you play the Gibson, what's that? You know, I know about Gibson guitars, but I didn't know Gibson had a banjo. Well, this friend of mine, Gary, that told me about the picks and all, he had an RB250. JD had an RB. They all had these bow tie, you know what I'm talking about. They had bow tie 250s. And, you know, I wanted one, so Dad told Mom, said, you know, honey, when I go to work and build a house and the tools and stuff I've got, if I got junky tools, I spend a whole lot of time dealing with something that I shouldn't have to deal with to use what I need to build what I'm building. He said, Barry needs a good banjo. He said, your mama's banjo it's seen its day. You know, it's a skinhead and it just doesn't work. So he took me to Gainesville and we went to, what was the name of that place? It was by the theater down there, Clark's Music Company. And they had a banjo that had been shipped to them from Gibson by mistake, and since it was a B item, they couldn't open it. If they had to open it, then they had to pay inventory on it, you know, floor plan. And they didn't want to open it. And I heard that they had it, and we went down, and you could go to Atlanta to Rhythm City or any of the music stores down there, and, you know, Music Mart, whatever, and you could not find a new banjo. It was about 73, 74, and they just, you know, the banjo thing had not jumped along with the music as it was proliferating. So,
no market.
Well, they had a market, but they just didn't have the instruments to build. I mean, Norland wouldn't shift time into it, so they weren't going to do anything with it. But we found this one and paid the guy. Daddy paid him $750 that he had earned back in the 40s. You know,
a lot of money.
A lot of money for that at that time. So I got that, and then I got to noticing at these festivals the people that I was trying to emulate and look at, like TP. You know, they had Granadas and threes and stuff like that. And the situation was, you know, these guys could play and they were older than me, but their banjo looked a whole lot different than mine, and you know, they sounded better too. So I got interested in it, and in my mind, every person that had a different banjo that said Gibson on it, I went up to them, tell me about your banjo. Everybody I went to, and I looked, then I got to noticing that there were some characteristics of the instruments that were the same. And then I noticed that there were several characteristics of the instrument that were different. Well, what happened? It changed, something broke, they replaced it, whatever. And I started learning that. Well, I started wanting an old banjo. You know, at the time, people were buying old banjos because they were cheaper than new ones. And they could get one and have a neck belt for a lot less, and then you could, if it were a tenor or if it was an old 5-string, it'd usually be worn out, you know, around home, because there were no Gibson banjos where I was. There were like 3 or 4, and that was it. And, you know, after I got to noticing the difference in the different characteristics, then I noticed that some year periods all looked the same, and other year periods were all different. And I guess like first generation players, I just learned what to do as how to do to play, and then learning the banjos, I learned from this is a new one, well this one's not. When was this made? And I just memorized all that stuff.
It's just assimilation of information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I started looking for an old banjo. And there was this fellow, old-time fiddle player, that used to come up to High Washington Fiddlers Convention named Sam Hawkins. And Sam Hawkins, folks tell me, they say, Sam plays good fiddle, and he played exactly like, what was that guy? He played fiddle early on, dang, I can't remember. Arthur E. Smith. He played just like Arthur E. Smith. Put the records on, listen to him, he was right with them. And one day we were there, and Junior Childers said, well, I'll tell you this much. He said, he's got the nicest old banjo you ever saw. And I said, you do? He said, what kind is it? He said, no, it's a Gibson. He said, it's a Gibson. And he said, Purdy, Biggin plays it. He called his wife Biggin. And they played, while he played fiddle. That's all she did. Just beat time and change chords, which is pretty much all you need. And he said, I gave it to Biggin years ago. He said, hang, it's a fine. And I said, Gibson? He said, yeah, gold plated.
Okay, there we go.
And in my mind, Yeah! Hit the, well, Dad said one day, he said, let's go down and find Sam and Lita. Her name was Lita. And I said, okay. So we went down and we went out to this other fellow's house that had a bow tie, and I looked at it. It was a 57 bow tie, and it sounded good, looked good, played good, the whole 9 yards. And I thought, dang, I'd like to have this. He said, no. He had seen this banjo at Hiawassee one night at the Fiddler's Convention, and they took him out to the car, and she opened the trunk lid, opened the case, and there it is, and shut the lid and slammed the boot lid down. He said, I've never seen anything like that. I don't know what that is. So anyhow, we went over there, found where they lived, called them up. She had gone to get her hair done, vanity as it is, and they lived over at Cold Mountain. And Sam said, hey, won't you just stay a while? We'll play it to you. I said, we got to get back. We got to go close the store. Mom's out. Okay, he said, you don't see that banjo? And I said, Lord, yeah. And I'm going, it's gold plated, it's a Gibson, it's got to be a granite. I said, Sam, is the head on it arched up from the sides, or is it flat all the way? It's flat all the way across. And I'm just about to have a hemorrhage, you know. And I had read in Pickin' magazine the account of D.W. Griffith finding his six. And all that. That was just the most intriguing thing, how he found it, you know, and just went nuts whenever he finally saw it. He didn't know what it was either. Well, I looked and he said, come on in the house. And there's an old farmhouse and it's about to fall in. And I looked and had one light bulb hanging down the ceiling on a chain. I walked over, and here's this ancient old 5-string case. And I got, oh my God, it's a 5-string. And I mean, the sides were peeling off. And, you know, it looked like it'd been drugged behind a truck down a dirt road. And I looked at it and looked at it, and I said, he said, go and open it up. Go and open it up. I said, okay. I looked at Dad, Dad looked at me, and I pulled the latches down, and I opened that up, and I looked down, and I said, oh my God. He said, what is it, son? I said, it's an 18. He said, what's that? I said, you remember Don Norman's 12 or whatever it was? And he said, yeah. I said, you know, Mike Johnson's got a 12. I said, well, this one's the gold-plated version of that. It is. And I said, yeah. Sam said, hey, get it out and play it. Well, I got it out, and I picked ping-ponged on the thing, got it up. And first note I hit, first thing I played was ground speed on it. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. The sound that this thing had was just like pinnacle. I mean, I didn't have anything. I had 2 RB250s. Right. They didn't sound like this.
Moves your earth right there.
Well, right there, you know, I said, well, I'm in love. I said, Sam, you want to say, I can't say. He said, give it to Megan back yonder. And he said, she's mighty particular about that thing. Well, she came home as we were leaving, and I said, Sam, I'd really like to have that banjo. And he said, well, she don't play it or I don't know if you can get it or not. Feller sold it to a feller one time and he said had to go get it. She just took on so about it. And I said, well, he said, she likes you. And I said, okay. You know, I didn't understand what that meant. Well, we went home and he said, call her. When you get to the house, call her back. We'll talk about it. Well, I was going that would give him time to talk to her and me time to wait to get. And so we did, and called, and she said, was this that little farmer boy that plays the banjo up there at Hiawassee? And I said, yes, ma'am, it is. I just love you today. She had a big dip of snuff in. Visually in my mind, I could see her because she dipped snuff all the time. Both sides of the mouth, and usually right as she kept a napkin, she watched it. And I said, Miss Lita, I said, about that banjo, you go, oh yeah, it's a fine banjo. It's a fine banjo. I said, well, would you sell it? And she said, you know, sold it one time, and I had to send Sam to go get it. She said, it's awful pretty banjo. But she said, I just don't want to get rid of it at all. And I said, but would you? And she said, call me back Monday. We'll study over it tomorrow, Sunday, and then, well, I'll tell you Monday. Well, heck, fire Monday. bright and early, I was ready to go. They said, don't call them now. Wait till this afternoon. And it was getting close to Christmas. And I said, believe them going. He said, you call them yet? And I said, no. About 4 o'clock, I called them. Well, I've got to make a decision here, she said. I said, well, now, I said, Miss Lita, I'd really like to have that banjo. She said, well, it'll come high if I sell it now. And I said, well, what's high? How high is high? And she said, call me Friday and I'll tell you. So, okay. So they pondered over it a week.
You're on the hook now.
You know, and I'm sitting there and I thought, oh my God, you know, back and two. And I said, believe I'm going to call her. He said, call her. So I sat there at the store. I gave her a call. She said, well, tomorrow's going to be Sunday again.
Oh, here we go.
And I said, well, have you made a decision? She said, sort of halfway. And I said, well, what do you think? I mean, what are you thinking? She said, I want you to come back down here. I said, when? Tonight? Tomorrow? She said, better yet, you just call me again tomorrow.
Yeah, there we
And I said, okay. So I called her again the next day, and she said, well, I've decided I'm going to sell it. I put my hand over the receiver, and I'm going, she said she'd sell it.
Yeah.
And Dad said, well, find out how much it is. I put, yes, ma'am. She said, it's going to come high, I told you. And I said, well, give me a price. She said, $1,000. I capped my hand back over the receiver and I screamed at the top of my lungs, yeah, baby, I'm going to get me an old banjo. So, yes, ma'am. I regained composure and I'm talking to her and I said, she said, yeah. I said, and you won't back out? Nope. She said, I just think the world of you, and I was thinking if anybody in the world ought to have my banjo, she said, it'd be you. And I said, okie dokie. Yeah. So I told Dad, I said, he said, you got any money? I said, yeah, I got some in the sock drawer at the house. I said, we're going to go get it out. He said, how much you got? I said, I got $1,500 saved. Now, what you don't understand is this is money I got for changing tires and trapping and skinning raccoons and coon hunters, whatever.
Sweat of your back.
Yes, buddy, I'm telling you. And it's money I'd saved over like 2 years just to buy me something, some type of car, whatever.
Sure.
You know. So I got the $1,000 out of the sock drawer and I put it in my pocket and I came back. Daddy called Mom and said, once you come take the store, we're going to get a banjo. So just so happened this was like Christmas Eve. She had planned it. She was going to let me have it, but she planned it where I would get it on Christmas Eve and have it for Christmas.
There you go.
And I didn't see it through all the hullabaloo. I was more worried about.
Well, you're focused on something totally different.
Yeah,
than a Christmas present.
Well, that's what she was doing.
Good for her.
Bless her heart.
Yeah.
And from when I went down there and paid her for the banjo, I had nothing to have to do but us stay 2 or 3 hours and me and Sam play, and that's what we did. Yeah. And I told her, I said, we're going to have to go back. I said, it's getting awful foggy. We got home, and Dad said, what are you going to do with that thing? I said, I'm going to take it completely apart and clean it. It's kind of dead sounding. And when I pulled the top tension up off, pulled it up, the original skin head had broken, but it was under it.
Yeah.
And I pulled the old plastic head that they had on it off, because whoever she had put that head on did not, she didn't want that skin head coming off. So they just put it on over it and tightened the thing back down. And I got this, and I played this banjo from, that was Christmas of 1977, New Year's of 78. I played this banjo from then till about 10 years ago, every day of my life, 3, 4 to 5, 10 hours a day. You know.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, that is the banjo right there.
Yeah, this is it.
That you've been talking about.
Yeah, this is it.
An original 5-string,
RB18,
top tension,
RB18.
18.
Yep.
Now, what I'm going to ask you to do, play any song or any 2 or 3 songs that express to you what that banjo is all about.
Well,
Because when you have something that long and the way you work to get it, it's not just about what the banjo is, it's what you and the banjo do together. Says it all, doesn't it?
sometimes, if you can think how to play,
Yeah.
I lose myself. But
But the magic's there.
sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes.
Every note.
Yeah.
You hear
Yeah.
every note.
It's always been real responsive. And it's always been, you know, top tension, since it has a flat resonator, all the sine wave that's coming off the diaphragm, which is the head, pushes straight out. A concave resonator, like a conventional banjo, it's doing this, that, and this, and you get a lot of low, but you don't get, or you get a lot of mid, or you get a lot of high if it's an arch top, unless you run the head really soft.
Right.
They're different,
Yeah.
and every banjo is different, but as a general rule, these things just knock the wall down.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And
Take us out with another song.
what would you like to hear?
What strikes you? What a wonderful, wonderful song. Played so well.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know what they say?